Greetings, folks. So, this video is going to start out as a writing video and then become a typology video because, I have plans to get famous. So, these are the scenes from A3, and I would like people to point out that to people that one of the things which is useful to me is working out exactly when a scene is taking place. And this is particularly important if you have two plots going on at the same time, because then you start thinking, does this person have enough time to get from there to there for that scene? So even if it never appears on screen, it's good to work out when, what the time is, because there's one scene in an episode where it's like, wait a minute, that scene was at that time, that lasted that minute. What was that character doing? Well, I put up a caption about what the character was doing. So it's useful to work out in order to avoid any potential errors there. But my point in showing this is that, so I had above here is a bit about doing the whole thing in sort of various stages, looking at the whole, all the plots, how the plots weave together, all the sort of the structural stuff, the plot stuff. And then there'll be individual files in these folders. But the question then becomes is when you're updating it. And it becomes, well, I update the scene because I don't just work on the whole long file. I like to work on the individual scene, because also with the individual scene, it's once that's ready, you export the PDF and then have the PDF collections for the player. So, for example, the actress playing Tamsi would have all the scenes with Tamsi in. Then I have to update the relevant file. So there's a lot of files and lots of different versions of files. There's a file with all of my color coding in. There's a version which is all black on white. There's this version that's the all black text version, and then there's this version that has all my color coding in and has comments. Right, so it's organizing all of this. And so at the moment, I'm having to go through because I have some whens to make, some improvements to make, and I have a list of scenes and whens to make changes. Wend being the English word for change. And so I have a list of whens to make for these sort of like with my sort of collaborations with not co-writers, co-reworkers for a different tongue, because it's written, but it's co-reworkers because it's being reworked. But so I'm going through the scripts and making those whens to get the scripts the best they can be for those people. But the thing is, and then I came up with a thing, okay, if I ever do put in videography description, I want to make that noticeable so it can be avoided if the reader wants to avoid it. Or, different reads concentrate on different. So I thought, I'll do that in Times New Roman. So now a process of going through all of the scenes and making the changes. And that's a short number of a scene or sequence SQ. So, and then these are the codes which never change. This is why this can be in a different order. Although, so for example, you have C6 before C5. These codes will never change. So my point is how to then organize that. And so I'll give you an example of with all the, because in the next one, which will show, this diagram will show you what has to be produced. And because so in going through every scene, in processing every scene, are there any changes to make? No. Well, then how do I know that I've changed it? Okay, so I'm going to say it's draft 2.0, which is effectively the same as draft 2, second draft standard. So, okay, let's just put that. Because I thought, should that be draft 3? No, it's not a big enough change. It was draft 2 when I did all the verbal individuality rewrite for all the main characters, and that took 6 weeks. OCD. Yeah. So then it would be a case of, I have to copy it into the episode ODT file, open document text, anyway, in case, just to make sure it's in there. And then you can see from here what the process is. And then when all this has been updated, then change the name to ODT at 2.1 DS. 2.1, why 2.1? Well, this explains why it would be 2.1. So if you have a scene, and there are improvements to make that's on my list of whens to do, or it contains some videography. Only a few contain videography. Okay, I'm going to do that in Times New Roman so it is skippable. So then it would be, that individual scene, rename that to 2.1 draft standard, and then copy that into the ODT for the episode. Right, then what? And then when all of that has been copied in, for this one, I have to do, for my own OCD reasons, a PDF of the latest version of the scene, and I keep a record of the change. I don't do track changes; it just doesn't work for me. I'm not. I don't have trust in it. I do my own roundabout the houses way of keeping track of changes. Right, and that is my color coding system. All black text version. Then I create the PDF, share, and then use that to create the PDF collections. So all the scenes taking place in a particular location or for a particular player, because it's for a particular character. Right. Then, so when all of those are done, because you don't want to do that after each one, because then you have to do the ODT, do the episode ODT, and then if you do another change, then keep doing it. You want to do it all at the end after all of those have been done. And so once all those have been copied in, and you know those have been copied in because the name has been changed, because on the folder it would say, how do I check that? Well, I check that would be at 2.0 DS or at 2.1 DS, depending on whether it got updated or not. And then once that's all updated, then it's produce an all black text version of that. Then I can export that as a PDF, and then a PDF for completeness. Right. And why do I have a color coding system? Well, I have a color coding system because it's part of it is my eyes. I like low contrast, so it's pink on white, but pink also looks good on black. And that's when it's new. If it's something that's hanging around from a previous draft, it's going to be light blue. It's green if it's from something that's been typed on a typewriter or from pen notes. That would be green, lime green, and then it would be darker green. No, it wouldn't. It would be dark blue if it's that from a previous draft that's been copied forward. So I have to do all this to organize all the ideas I have. And so it's like complicated. So, but it gets it all clear and ends up all these changes to make. Now, now this will be an example of And again, so being systematic. So this is then an example of, now this is for the typology people, if any of the people are here for the show and thinking ahead, and they're interested in sort of like my strategic thinking. So this then gets into information and energy. So I'm just going to go to a model of, I have a different thing on. So it's going to get to how Model G sees. Now, this particular profile of INTP, Socionics LII, was actually good. Before, Model G decided to say that TE was the weakest function in LII. Well, if I get my dramedy made, TE ain't my weakest function. Right. Big if. Right. While having a clear vision of problem, finds it hard to take action. Okay. Worried that its analysis of few practical applications. Worried, well versed in business matters. Can suggest advisor knows how to build an effective organization, but typically does not possess the energy and organization necessary to put their skill to work. But again, there's like caveats there. It's like can suggest well versed in business. But the point there, what this doesn't take into account, now later profiles would have it that INTP is useless at TE, this outward thinking. But I would say there are a bunch of INTPs working in the STEM fields, and there is a load of TE in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Well, especially, let's take mathematics out of it if it's applied, but definitely engineering. There's a lot of TE. Right. So my point here is that you know what this doesn't take into account. Whilst having a clear vision of the problem, it finds it hard to take action. But it's this information, this having a clear vision of the problem, makes the task easier. So, for example, this makes the task easier of doing my updates because I know what to do. I've got it clear in my mind. And before this, it was on a piece of paper and it wasn't clear. The bits about PDFs were in blue. And I was thinking, that's not the right color code for my mind because PDFs are red. That's what the icon is. It's red. So it's like, that has to be consistent. And so it was all in lines. I thought, okay, so if I do it in this sort of almost flowchart-ish kind of thing, that's a lot easier. So I've got it straight in my mind in terms of the information, the know-how, and that will enable me to take action in the world. I'm moving files around on the computer, but the point is that having a plan makes it easier because there's more information. So this is why this is why I have problems with this aspect of Model G, where it will say that TE is the weakest function in the LII because it has the weakest energy. But when you have high information, it affects how easy the task becomes easier. Whereas if somebody had to do a lot of stuff and didn't have the organizational skills, and it even says there, has the organizational skills. Or does it say typically doesn't have the organizational skills? Typically does not possess the organizational skills? But it can plan it out. I planned it out. It might take a lot of effort and be boring, but it can be done. It can be planned out. It depends on the kind of organization that we're talking about. And also, this assumes that this is an overly narrow definition of TE in terms of business logic. But let's just think about quite a lot of strategic construction involves strategic coordination, and so designing an aircraft, there's going to be a lot of INTPs in that, or highly represented anyway. So the organization has to be there as long as it can be all sort of planned out. And if it's within strategic planning, then INTP likes that. Right, so here's my point though about energy. That, and this is a technical point that people just don't get. So in my own model, I have TE as fourth, not last. SE is last. That's about taking the action. Typically does not add a take action is due to the SE. Depends how interesting it is. Now, so let's do this about information. So we have, so if we say it has less energy, so the effort required to solve a task. Right, so effort limit. Right, so say you have for a particular task an effort limit of 5. I have an effort limit of, what was it, 4 there, and I have an effort limit of, the effort limit is lower. Right, but the task might require 5, but you're only willing to put 4 in. So you then consider, oh, it's not worth it, it's too hard. Oh, it's not worth, oh, it's really hard. But if someone has less effort for it, but because of know-how, it's easier. So even though the effort limit is less, because the task is easier, the person is willing to do it. Why is effort required lower? Because info is higher. So info about competence, i.e. know-how. Yeah. So it makes it easier. That, having that all planned out makes that easier. Know all the step-by-step instructions. Right. I mean, obviously, as the student knows how to do something, the student's going to pick it up because of know-how. So why, in a model, not realize that information can change the amount of energy required, or shall we say, effort required for the task? This can frequently happen, where Dario has talked about this, where someone has changed careers because after 10 years the job is so easy that the person feels unchallenged and wants to go to a new career. Energy required is less because more know-how. Right, so she's so good at it, she makes it look easy. Easy when you know how. So here you have effort high, low info. So it's usually when someone does something new, it can be, oh, this is really, really hard. So much mental effort has to be put in. But when the information is high, say 5 years later, the same task, and you're teaching somebody else, it can seem a lot easier because the know-how has increased. So this idea that, so there's how much energy you have for a task, and there's how much energy a task requires, but the amount of energy or effort a task requires, the effort required changes depending on your know-how level. Even if your motivation to do the task is low, but then with that calculation yourself, you'll say, oh, I don't like doing this. But it's a piece of pie. I'll do it anyway. So even that affects the motivation level. So they will affect each other. It's just like those people who want to keep nature and nurture separate. Well, they interact with each other. So energy and information are going to interact with each other. Or what we can say is motivation and know-how. The motivation to do a task and the ability to do the task are going to interact with each other. So, for example, if you have someone presented with something that's really, really hard for that person, and the person doesn't have a lot of motivation to do it, that task ain't going to get done unless there's some external motivation come in. You know. So yeah. Right. So what else do we have? So here's some. This is what I was putting on the Model G graphics about 5 years ago. And so I would add these bits about information. But again, the model was changed. And so I would say least energy but biggest information can solve problems. And again, the stuff from me is in violet. So there was the greatest resistance to lows in a bad way. Yeah, but that's what he said about break. So here, this is where there is a difference between the way I see Model G and the way it is taught now. The way it is taught now, this is the weakest function it's taught, and this is not the weakest. But I see this as the weakest function because I see how information changes the amount of effort required. The same task that requires a lot of effort of you when you are a beginner does not require the same effort 5 years later when you have more know-how. Or you could say past experience of doing something similar. So your knowledge, the information is changing the amount of energy required. Right, so it says here, breaking, it says there, break is the least adequate result of greatest resistance to loads. So if you're saying that break is the least adequate in resistance to loads, then why would you say that later on teach that this is the weakest position? Is it because if you have your model like that, you can sort of make it appear all symmetrical? This is the strongest, this is the weakest, because it's been arranged in benefit rings. But, you know, the nuance is there. It still has high information. That information and these nuances were there in, and you can see here that finds it hard to take action. It doesn't say it's impossible though. Whereas this, if you actually read in these profiles, these earlier profiles that I have and had full-tongued for me, this was the weakest one. It's just that later teachings of Model G would have this function be, this slot be the weakest. And so, yeah, I disagree with that. Right. Break is the weakest. Right, so what else did I put in here? Yeah, but I've put hair there. Yeah, that's my phrase. Monitor position is energetically weakest, but ability is the ally of willpower, to coin a phrase. Yeah. Ability is the ally of willpower. Ability given enough motivation, especially external, can work wonders. But energetically stronger position 7 is out of its depth. Yeah, that's the key. Out of its depth. This slot here, out of its depth. And I've put here about effort to effect ratio. Yeah, my case for the allergic being the weakest position. Right. Right. INTP won't go drill sergeant, but he can go administer. Managing several parallel processes and creating procedures. Now, monitor has highest, so that's this one. That would be TE in INTP. Highest info, e.g. TE in, whilst having a clear vision of the problem finds it hard to take action. Allergic has lowest info. Ooh. I mean, if you don't know what you're doing, how can you do the task? Fact, easier, lower effort to effect efficiency ratio to solve a problem, the more you understand it. So you have more effect for the little effort that you put in. And I can give you an example. Right, again, these all created a TE business. I can give you an example. So there's something from an NLP book, that's neuro-linguistic program, not natural language programming, of somebody who, a plumber was called in, and and nobody else could solve this problem. And he asked for, and in his bill was like $1,000, and it was $1 for the hammer, $999 for knowing where to tap. So he had all of this knowledge, you know where the problem was, and he solved it, or she, so that's a good example, solved the problem because of the know-how. Right. So knowledge, that information, that matters. So then what else do we have here? I think I've written something similar for energy and information. So I've written it about here, about TE. Right. Right. This oblong's red text reads slot 4. I have adapted the idea from Dr. Vigelenko's model G that slot 4 is high in information but low in energy. But I say because of the high in information, that means there is, get a bit of self-discipline, you can get it done. I frame this as slot 4 being high in potential ability but low in internal motivation. That's another thing as well. If you have the know-how and you don't have a lot of internal motivation, but you have some external motivation, whereas if you have no know-how and then you have the external motivation, you have a problem. MB, external motivation can work wonders. E.g., someone could give you $1,000 worth of motivation to mow a lawn. But that $1,000 of motivation has less relevance to the average person tasked with scoring 150 on an IQ test to get the cash. Because the know-how's not there. You see what I mean? So if it's a task where the know-how is irrelevant, but you can have the external motivation, in that case, it comes down to ability more than motivation. Ability is the ally of willpower, to coin a phrase. Right. And then, right, here we go. Rather than adopted, I adapted it because my view is that this slot is very different from Dr. G's when it comes to efficacy. My key assertion is that higher information one has, the higher information one has about a function-related task, that could be, or the more, about a function-related task, the more understanding and know-how Oh, okay, that's all right. The higher information one has about a function-related task, the more understanding and know-how one has. This leads to higher task efficiency, i.e., low effort to effect ratio for something the type resembler is not overly keen about doing. For comparison, slot 8, Achilles heel, has low information, which I correlate to low potential ability and low internal motivation. Important dynamic to grasp. Effort required to complete a task versus motivation to spend effort on it, e.g., compare these tasks. Task A is easier but very boring versus task B, which is much harder but not as boring. Certain types are more self-disciplined than others, e.g., ESTJ more willing to do unvalued TI tasks than ESFP is to do unvalued SI tasks. So, now the thing is, please comment about this and show me that you understand, because I get the impression that people don't get this nuance about information and all that. They just find it utterly tedious. But here's an example. Have this problem of how to organize all of this, but you have the information there. This to do, it at least makes it easier for me. So this we have this high information, high energy in that organizing it and planning it out in terms of getting organized. You can see that I have the information for it. And in planning it out like this, and by me getting it straighter in my mind, that then makes the actual execution of the task easier, because I've actually clarified the information in my mind. I've clarified the process that I'm going to go through a scene. If there's no changes, I'll change the name to 2.0. If there is a change, I'll change it to 2.1 DS. Then I will copy those into that, export it. Save a version, do that as all black, go through all of those pages because there might be some bits that don't change the black, and then export it. And then it's like, well, that's easy. See, the thing is with this, it's remembering where you are in the process, and so having some way of not making mistakes. And so this kind of, if I can plan it out first, sort of like intellectually understand it and plan it out first, that makes then taking the actions a lot easier, rather than it being natural to me. It's not natural for me to then do it without making a sort of a plan first. So I sort of organized my know-how. So this is that bit in the this bit which doesn't necessarily follow in this bit here. Well, having a clear vision of the problem finds it hard to take action. Yeah, but it doesn't mean it can't take action. Now, if someone doesn't have a clear vision of the problem, the person's not going to know what action to take. That can happen. Number two, well versed in business. However, you do get INTPs in STEM subjects. Can suggest a variety of. Typically does not possess any necessary to put the knowledge to work. But that's sort of well valued. But what you can this sort of depiction of this person here is that what you sort of get is, if you were to read this about someone and you were saying, it's like, so all this person needs is some self-discipline and this person can do it. Has a clear vision of the problem. Well versed, you see what I mean? It's just a little, and that can be grown. Whereas if the understanding is not there, it's just not going to happen. So, for example, it would take me a long time to get an understanding of music. A long, long time. Yeah. So, like that guy, what is he, Rick Beato? A long time. 10 to 20 years. Yeah. So, that understanding, very important. And we're talking about tasks. So, there we go. So, those are my thoughts on that in this sort of combo video. Where's my arrangement? That's my arrangement. Well, I'd have TE there, where it's the sort of the. So in my arrangement of INTP, I say that, and I think it's more useful to say to INTPs, we're not letting you off the hook. We're not flattering you by saying, oh, like the way that other one can, where it's a bit like, if only you could be bothered, you'd be a T genius. But you can't be bothered. And we're going to let them off the hook. Whereas I think it's more useful to say to the INTP, look, you have the ability. You just got to get some flipping self-discipline and get some growth. Unsung allies, growth. Growth, you know, for INTPs out there. So you have your strategic coordination and your theoretical thinking and ideas. Well, get some NI, plan it all out, have a vision. I want to focus on this. Get some self-discipline in there. Integrate, use all 4 NT functions, and then that'll be good for your strategic builder. The construction and the coordination. Right. Yeah. Use, and then again, growth. Use the NI and the TE. And again, for NTJs, they could learn, sometimes they might get a one-track mind, see some other alternatives. So integrate them, the other strong, the unvalued strong functions, the unsung allies. Because I'm telling you this, a lot of INTP scientists are using TE. They're using empirical thinking. Yeah. Now, another way of looking at it is that sort of tendency towards organization could be some bit of SI coming in, but it's sort of like a bit of self-discipline in, might be a bit of Enneagram 6 as well, in terms of like, I can do this, or if I don't do it like this, I'm going to go wrong. I'm going to mess this up. But I think what I stated before holds true about internal and external motivation. If the information is there, given sufficient external motivation, the person can do it. Yeah. So, for example, with that thing about suddenly ask someone to, oh, I'll give you $1 billion if you can suddenly develop a load of hand-to-eye coordination and be able to hit a baseball thrown at 95 miles per hour. And it's like, sorry, no matter how hard I try, I'm not going to get any better at that. Whereas, again, it depends on the task, where it's like, if you said to someone, I want you to learn this language and to get to this standard, and I'll give you 5 years, and I'll pay for you to go to the country to help immerse yourself in the language. And I think, okay, I'll have it. I can do that. $1 billion, you say? Is that in inflation protected? We'll say so. $5 billion worth of gold worth now. So yeah, it's like, okay, I think I can do that. Right. So yeah. So this thing of like motivation and ability, and they can, interact with each other. Yeah. So there was that expression from, I think it was from Henry Ford. It was, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And what that sort of means is that if someone thinks he or she can't do it, well, that means they're not going to try, and so they're not going to get it done. And so that way, they're right. Because if the positive belief isn't there, so it's like a little bit of this Aristotle's golden mean in terms of, not being half full or half empty. And even that depends on whether you want the thing to be half full or half empty. Anyway, so a bit digressional, but yeah, I would say self-discipline. Yeah. And so this earlier profile is okay for that, because it does indicate that, it doesn't say, it just says finds it hard to take action. So it's not saying it's impossible. Typically does not possess knowledge to work. Typically. So it is possible. Whereas this one is, whereas you can see here, it says here, finds it hard. It doesn't say here. It doesn't say finds it hard to force or control other people. It just states it right out. Can't force or control other people. Can't. This one doesn't say can't take action. Can't. Does not have the energy. Can never possess the organizational. So you see that. So this version of it is, whereas it now, the way it's taught now, it's like this is useless and this is the worst function and worse than that. And I can't get on board with that, because in terms of internal motivation, maybe, but the information changes that, the know-how. And that goes back to that sheet. That goes back to that sheet. And this is why it's one of these things, I suppose, with teaching children or anyone, it's like, start the person at the right position in order to build up that. Because if you throw them in at the deep end, then it's like the task is too hard. And it's like, oh, I don't want to do this. The task is way too hard. And it's like, there's a knock on self-confidence, whereas that's why you take people up through the levels. And for certain tasks, people are going to need more levels than somebody else. Because someone can be a quick study in one area and not in another, because it's not someone's strength. Right. There we go. And that's about it, really. Yeah. Right, so there's a bit of an update then. What else am I doing? Yeah.